Red blood seeped into the clean white towels sitting where the sheriff took his final breath. It smelt of rusted iron and musty linen. It was an odd feeling to stand in that empty motel room where decades of untold carnage had taken place so close to where I spent my life. Somehow, though, it still felt like home. In all my years of emptying the ashtray and replacing their unused sheets, I never lingered for longer than I had to. In the back of my mind, I believe I had always sensed the evil beneath the floorboards, but now I had all the time in the world to linger. I was waiting for their return. It was only an hour or so before sunrise when I heard the familiar rattling shake of their old station wagon pulling into the parking lot. I gathered up the towels, stuffed them into my cleaning cart, and did my best to remain small and invisible when the door opened. The old man was the first to enter. He greeted me with that eerie, fake smile. The others followed in after. I pushed my things aside and waited for my chance to exit. The teenage girl entered last, holding the hand of my sister. They continued about their business as if I wasn't even there. Most of them headed straight to the bathroom where I heard the trapdoor open to their lair below. The old man stayed behind and lit up a cigarette and then offered one to the old woman. She turned back from the bathroom and joined him at the table. My sister, on the other hand, immediately turned on the old television. She stood in the center of the room and watched as an old black and white Western movie began with a shot of the sunrise. With the older couple paying no attention to me, I leaned in and whispered to my sister, "I think you left this," I said, pulling the photo of her and I from my pocket. She broke her gaze from the cowboy on the screen and glanced at the photo. She took it from my hand. "I have the other half if you want it, with Mama and Papa in it," I said, looking over at the old woman, who only spared me a passing glance. I lowered my voice even more. "I can bring it to you in a few hours, but you'll have to wake up early." She glanced at the curtains covering the window and the world outside. I tapped at the back side of the photo. She turned it over. I'd written the words, "If you are alone, I will protect you," in red ink. She nodded. I left and returned to my room. I did my best to sleep for the next few hours, but I was constantly awoken by horribly vivid nightmares that reflected my current maddening reality. When the alarm went off, I'd already been awake for an hour. I crawled out of bed and forced myself to eat something. With such a heavy sense of impending doom, I found it difficult to focus on the menial tasks like brushing my teeth. Too anxious to think about anything else. I checked the family's room, cracking the door slightly and peeking in. It was empty, except for some lingering smoke that danced with the dust in the sunbeams. My sister was still asleep beneath the floorboards. I used this time to walk back out to the septic tank where I lit the gasoline sheets and fat-soaked clothing in the burn pit. The flames reached high and I prayed this would burn for at least a few hours, long enough to be noticed when the time came. At the edge of the pit, I looked down at the legacy of horror that my family would forever be aligned with. Forever discovered this quaint motel in the mountains would not survive. My grandfather's legacy would no longer end with its demolition, but live on as macabre folklore. As the corpse fat-fueled flames danced in the burn pit nearby, it became clear that I was on the precipice of insanity. My plan was little more than a half-baked assumption that I could somehow defeat beings that had lived over 3 of my lifetimes. But it felt as if I had no other choice. So I collected every single tank of propane that would fit into the cruiser. I stacked them floor to ceiling in the back seat with a few more on the passenger side seat and floor. There was just enough gas left in the tank to make it back to the parking lot. Even sputtering on fumes, I was able to coast into a spot near the family station wagon. The sun was low in the sky and daylight was waning. I checked the room again, knocking lightly as I entered. I slipped inside without opening the door wide and found my sister sitting on the bed, shrouded in the darkness of the heavy blackout curtains. I produced the photograph of my parents from my back pocket and handed it to her. "Do you still want to leave?" she asked. "Yes, but I will make sure you are safe. They won't trap you in those caves, I promise." "They think you changed your mind. Master said you are too afraid to leave this place. She said you are weak and insignificant. She said that you are nothing to fear." "She's wrong," I said, pulling the comforter from the bed. The light was low, but it was enough to harm her pale, fragile skin. I had seen how quickly it engulfed Graham. I knew how little it took to kill them. I had my sister lay on the bed and wrapped her in the comforters. I tucked in every corner and picked her up, holding the seams close to my body. I carried her to the office as fast as I could. Once inside, I took her behind the desk and told her to hide. The window shades were already drawn, but she remained covered, hunkered down behind the check-in counter. "Do not move until I return. Do you understand?" I asked. She nodded. I sprinted back to the room as fast as my legs would take me. The sun was now setting and I only had a short time before the family would wake. I remade the bed with the comforters from next door and smoothed them out, as if they would even notice. With everything back in place, I returned to the cruiser and dragged each tank into the room, one by one. I took the heaviest ones first and opened the valves wide. Some hissed violently while others were a low, breathy whistle. The faded odor of sulfur was faint with age and I barely noticed the scent. With the last tank open, I sealed the door shut and shoved wet towels at the base. I set a timer for sundown and hurried back to my sister. I found her huddled beneath the comforter with both photos in hand, holding them together as one. She looked up at me with sad eyes. "I wish I never had to leave. I miss being a child," she whimpered. The statement itself sounded so odd coming from such a little girl. "Do you remember why you left?" I asked. She nodded. "Mother said it was the only way. She promised to always be waiting though. She lied." "She did her best, but people can't wait forever," I said, brushing her hair back. "We can," she said, looking up at me with eyes that I only now realized were marbled with deep black veins. "Why do you visit when you do, every 4 years?" I asked. "The road is long, and the further we go from the caverns, the more we must feed. The more we feed, the more dangerous it gets. Why don't you stay here where it's safe?" I asked. "We can only stay for as long as the earth allows us. If we stay too long, the soil becomes impure and poisoned, so we must always move. Only in the caverns can we sleep forever." "Then why not stay in the caverns?" I asked. "Would you choose a life of eternal darkness and constant hunger?" She replied with the slightest hint of indignance. "No," I admitted. "Before now, we'd never stopped. We've never turned around." "So why now?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "We had to return so Master could destroy the betrayer," she said with a laugh. My watch alarm beeped in warning. Dusk was coming. "Graham?" I asked. She leaned in with the intensity of a zealot. "When Uncle Matthew felt his father burn, he begged the Master to come back and seek vengeance, but she refused. She felt he was responsible for his own demise, until she felt her maker die. You see, we can feel the pain of the ones that made us. It keeps us connected, keeps us safe. makes us family. When we found that the betrayer had stolen the gift and killed our others, he deserved a painful death. My watch beeped again. I needed to return to the room, but my sister sensed this and grabbed me by the wrist. "He was my friend. He didn't kill them," I said, taken aback by her reveling in his murder. "But he did. She let him burn in the sun so that his agony would last. Only she decides who lives forever. That's why Mother's sister was mad. She was refused the gift despite what Uncle Matthew promised. So she lit herself on fire and tried to take us with her. Uncle Matthew begged Master to wait for his father, but the boy was buried and the sun was coming soon. So we left him. Master said we do not have room for the weak," she said, her eyes ablaze with righteousness. I pulled my arm from her grasp and stood. "That all changes tonight," I said, stepping away from her. "I remember the day you arrived. That was the day that everything changed," she replied. "You were a child when I was born," I said dismissively. "Yes, but I remember the day you arrived here. Mother found you hiding beneath the bed, too small to consume and too young to be worthy of notice. They left you orphaned, and Mother took you in," she said with a wicked smile as if she could taste my pain. My mind immediately went back to the photo of myself with those strangers. I thought back to the coldness my mother had for me, while her warmth for other children was always evident. "I don't remember any of that," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "Why would you?" she said with an evil smirk. I did not want to believe her. The alarm beeped, a final alert, and I realized I was out of time. I sprinted to the family's room and pulled back the wet towel. I held it to my mouth and entered. I smelt nothing, but I swear I could sense a haziness of the air. I tied the towel around my mouth and grabbed the first 2 tanks. They were lighter than before, which means they were emptied. I hurried as fast as I could, throwing them into the parking lot. I just needed them to be out of the room. It was impossible to do quietly, but I did my best to muffle any bump while keeping the door closed as I entered and exited. While it took me a half hour to fill the room, it only took me minutes to empty it of the tanks. My hands bled from cuts on the rusted metal handles. On my way out with the final tank, I heard the floor in the bathroom creak as the hatch opened. I locked the door and returned the towel to the crack beneath the door. I moved a few of the tanks around the corner, but abandoned the task when I heard movement inside. I sprinted back to the office and found my sister already standing in the center of the room. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Keeping you safe," I replied. "I am safe. She knows you won't hurt me. You can't hurt any of us," she said. Standing in the doorway to the office with my sister staring through me with those deep, black eyes, I began to realize that she was not the little girl I thought I knew. It was her reveling in the pain of others that made me realize she was more them than me. In more ways than one, she wasn't my sister anymore. It was then that I heard an unholy scream come from inside the family's room. The teenage girl, the master, had noticed my sister was gone. I thought for a moment that my plan was unraveling, but the old man was stuck in his habits. The door was thrown open and the teenage girl emerged, beast-like in her anger. But the old man, the park ranger, was not concerned. Instead, he did as he always did. He lit a cigarette. The explosion shook the very foundation of the motel. Pictures were thrown from the walls and glass shattered. When I looked out at the parking lot, my ears still ringing, I saw the master lying motionless on the asphalt. I stepped outside with my sister rushing past me, letting out a primal scream as she ran to the master. Behind them, the motel room was aflame in hellish fire. I could hear a loud, ghoulish moan, even above the crackle of embers. The old man stumbled out, howling in pain. The first time in my life I had seen any sign of emotion from him. His flesh stripped from the bone as the heat melted his skin. His white skull was slowly revealed behind blackened flesh as it dripped off his face. With each step he left behind charred chunks of melted skin in a smouldering trail of burning gore. He made it only a few more feet before collapsing in a heap of scorched agony. He struggled to crawl away from the flames, but as he tried, his muscles separated from his body, like what I can only describe as pulled pork. The building collapsed in on itself, trapping the others inside. I could hear their screams as they begged for the master to save them. She awoke suddenly and leapt up. Her eyes seemed to darken into black orbs set deep in her skull. She let out another primal scream and ran towards me. I reached into the back of my pants and pulled out the revolver, aimed and fired. The first shot struck her in the shoulder and it seemed to surprise her. The pain from the silver-tipped bullet. She slowed for a moment, feeling the sting. I watched as my sister felt it too. The master bared her sharp teeth and continued on. But I waited to fire. I waited until I knew I would not miss. I waited until she was close enough to see my own reflection in her black eyes. I waited until it was almost too late. And I fired. All 6 rounds struck her, with the last catching her right between those dead, soulless eyes. She dropped to the ground. But I remembered silver cannot kill. It only slows. I pulled out the crystalline rock that killed the very creature that started this nightmare, and approached the master with caution. I could hear her rapid, short breaths as her body worked to push out the silver-tipped bullets. I rolled her over and raised the crystalline rock above my head, ready to plunge it into her heart. But I was blindsided. My sister tackled me to the ground. "You cannot kill us!" she screamed, her eyes now full black orbs. "She's the killer! She's evil! I am your sister!" I screamed back. She showed her teeth and leaned in so close I could feel her cold breath on my neck. "You are food!" she hissed. She opened wide and bit down. I could feel her sharp, jagged teeth as they pierced my skin, tearing at my flesh. I had no choice. I had to fight back. I only meant to hurt her when I plunged the crystalline rock into her side. She howled in pain and rolled off of me. I saw the strange salted rock do its work as the skin around her wound started to shrivel and dry. I went to pull it out, but she pushed me away and grabbed hold of it herself. She yanked at the deadly stake piercing into her side, trying to remove the crystalline rock. But it broke. The larger part fell to the ground with a dull end. The rest remained inside her, eating away at her innards. She looked me in the eyes one more time. And for a moment, just a moment, I could see the face of the little girl I once knew. She collapsed to the ground as a ribcage collapsed in on itself. She was gone. I looked back to the master, but the place where she fell was now just a spot of wet blood on the asphalt. I looked frantically for her, the orange flames of the fire illuminating everything. She was still alive. and I was defenseless. I picked up the dull crystalline rock and ran towards the cruiser. I could feel the moisture leach out of my hands as I gripped the rock as tight as I could. The explosion had shattered the front window of the cruiser, so I had to work fast. From the front seat, I retrieved the items I'd taken from the sheriff's body: handcuffs, keys, and his service pistol. When I stood up and turned round, she was already there, a silhouette amongst the backdrop of flames. I fired again. The bullet struck her chest, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she flashed a ghoulish smile. There was nowhere to hide, and I knew that it was impossible to outrun her, so I chose the only safe place I could think of. I threw open the back door to the cruiser and crawled in, though I was careful not to pull it shut just yet. The master leapt onto the hood of the car and sneered at me through the metal gate separating the front and back seats. Slowly, she crossed over to the opposite side of the car, her gaze locked on me like the predator she was. I was backed against the door, ready to push it open behind me, but even then I knew I couldn't outrun her. She opened the rear door across from me. Her long, clawed nails gripped the metal grate over the window as she pushed the door wide open. I know she was sure that she had me trapped, so she toyed with her prey. She moved slow and deliberate as she crawled into the back seat with me, her pitch black eyes swirling with reflections of the fire outside. She smiled, and a jagged toothy grin was revealed, dripping with foul-smelling slime. Again, I waited until she was close enough to kill, and then I taunted her. "This is what I used to kill your maker," I said, holding up the broken crystalline rock. Her emotionless eyes remained fixed on mine, her expression was unchanging. With an inhumane quickness, she grabbed hold of my wrist, tight enough to break a bone, but I held the rock as long as I could. I watched her eyes and waited. The moment she broke away to glance at the dull broken rock that had killed her creator, I acted. With my free hand, I slammed the handcuff link onto her wrist. She squeezed tight with retribution. I could hear the bones snap. I dropped the rock and kicked backwards. I tumbled out of the cruiser and into the parking lot, hitting the asphalt with a sickening thud. She leapt at me but fell short, unable to break free from the handcuff that I had secured to the metal dividing grate inside. I kicked the door shut and then ran around the vehicle as she yanked at the handcuffs. I slammed the other door shut. With a free hand, she tried to open the door, but found it locked from the outside. Slowly, I stepped away, watching the violent flurry of movement as she struggled to break free from the restraints. She kicked at the metal-grated windows, managing only to dent them. From a distance, I watched the fire burn in the darkness, hidden by the night sky, and I waited for her to die. I was waiting for sunrise to come and purge this world of her evil. From the back seat of the cruiser, she screamed and threw herself against the windows. I watched her fight for hours, locked in the back seat. Eventually, she even resorted to gnawing off her own hand. Thick black blood spurted from her wound, spraying the glass and obstructing my view inside. As the sun crept over the trees, she stopped fighting. I wasn't sure if she accepted her death or just expended the last of her murderous will to live. I expected to hear her scream as the sun took her body, but she did not. I watched as the flames inside the vehicle licked at the blood-splattered windows, and I knew that she was dead. Just as Graham's body had become a charred black husk, so did that of my sister and the old man. The master, though, she burned so hot Nothing but dust remained in the back seat of the cruiser. As I stood over the corpse of what I now know was never my sister, I realized that I was no longer linked to this hellish place. I was free of the tether of the bloodline that kept me here, burdened by a sense of loyalty to a family that was never mine. I emptied the safe of the blood money that was meant to maintain this motel forever. There was no longer anything that held meaning for me here, so I watched as the flames leapt from room to room, and eventually the office and the cottage itself. The smoke from the septic tank burn pit still billowed thick, black smoke, and I hoped whoever came it would draw their attention there. I hoped that finding those bodies would bring closure to the families who lost their loved ones to the dead roads. I hoped that those bodies would be the last. I hoped that I'd actually ended it tonight. Hope that after hearing my story, you will understand. I hope that if you ever meet a family that seemingly never ages, you will know what they are and know whatever they promise. You will never be a part of their family. I left in their old station wagon with nothing but a duffel bag of old bills, no longer bound to the motel by a legacy of blood. As I passed the fire engines on the way down the mountain, I thought to myself, the family may have been able to live forever, but until now, I had never been able to live at all.